We are diving into a juicy conversation with my friend and the queen of color correction, Cassandra McGlaughlin. She has been a hair educator for brands like Redken. She's a master colorist, and she's also left a cult, which is why we're bringing her on today so that you can learn about what it looks like to be this famous top of your industry. And then all of a sudden, boom, everything crashes because in your personal life, you decide to come out of the closet, leave behind the religious cult, and really step into your authentic self as a trauma-informed life coach. This is the short snippet story of Cassie, and I can't wait to share. But before I do, I am so excited to bring you something that I have been working on brand new behind the scenes. For the last 8 years, I have had a Google Doc off to the side on how to teach my secrets to be a six-figure salon suite owner. And because I've been so just passionate about sharing on self-love and self-care, I've just pushed it to the back burner until now. Mark your calendar for October 7th. It's a Monday because hello, we are stylists, and I am teaching a free webinar to teach you all of the different tools, strategies, and tactics that I implement in my business to scale to six figures without the burnout. We are leaving behind hustle culture and stepping into flow, and I'm going to teach you those energetic boundaries for free. All you have to do to sign up and save your seat is go to brittanycarmichael.com/stylist-webinar. This is going to get you access to a free masterclass, a live Q&A with me, and all the systems that have helped me stick to my self-care, make sure that my clients are aligned, and have that effortless marketing attraction on autopilot. I cannot wait to share these secrets. Make sure you sign up for this webinar. I have literally never done anything like this, and I've been behind the chair for 20 years educating for K18 and amazing brands like Colorproof. So it's amazing that the time is finally here. I get to share all of the wisdom that I've learned over the last 2 decades with you. All you have to do to sign up for the Hustle to Flow Masterclass on how to build a sustainable six-figure salon suite without the burnout is go to brittanycarmichael.com/stylist-webinar, and I'll see you there. Y'all, I am so excited to bring on my triple Scorpio friend, Cassie, who is an amazing educator, coach, teacher, leader, creative. I could go on with this list. And in fact, I asked her, how do you want me to introduce you? Because you do so many incredible things. And I have a feeling that if you're tuning in, you're probably multi-passionate like we are. And when I was talking to my girlfriend recently about her story and her journey, which I can't wait for you to hear, I immediately said to her, oh my God, we need to have you on the Elevated Life podcast. We need to share your story. And one thing that really stands out to me, babe, is the fact that you've worked so hard in the hair industry. You've made a name for yourself as a major consultant for popular brands, multiple popular brands. You've really seen the insides of the industry, of our beauty industry. And that has led you down this path of your own self-healing and your own creative expression and trying to find where you fit into the industry at this point and how you can best serve. So I would love to just kick off our conversation around, how did you get into hair? How did it lead you to become an educator? And what does that next chapter look like for you when it comes to hair world, coaching, healing, all the things? You know, no big deal. Let's
All
just
the
throw you
things.
off to the deep end.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll start with how I got into hair because it's actually a really beautiful story. And like, I don't think I realized the divine guidance that happened in that process until like almost probably a decade later. But I had two really amazing hairdressers in my life, and I was always really interested in hair, and they were always like, you should be a hairdresser. But I was in college at the time. I was the first of the 4 children to go to college. And my dad's like, yeah, you're carrying on the dream, so a little bit of pressure. And I just kept getting these messages from the hairdressers, like, you should be a hairdresser. You should be a hairdresser. I kept putting it on the back burner. And I had just like, this is kind of a long story short, but I had this moment. I remember sitting on the couch and a commercial for a beauty school came on. And like, I just had like, probably one of the first moments I had this like aligned feeling, like head to toe, where I was like, that's what I'm going to do with my life. Like, it was just like, no question, pure clarity. And I was like, okay, now what? Like, I'm in college, like, now what? And so I actually had an appointment with my hairdresser the next day, and he's like, I don't know why I thought of you, but I saved this. And it was an invitation to a grand opening of a beauty school. And he's like, I just feel like you should go. And I was just like, oh, this is weird. Like, you know, I didn't have like context for what was actually happening, but I was like, this is like a weird kind of timing thing. And I was like, okay. And so I went to the grand opening. I was too scared to actually go in because by nature, I'm a super shy, introverted person. And I sat in my car watching all these cool people walk into the school. And I was like, oh God, I don't belong here. Like, I'm scared. And I remember I didn't actually even go to the grand opening. I literally just sat there and watched. And so I called the school later, made an appointment, went in, and I was like, oh, wait, no, I think these are my people. And like, maybe I am cool. Like, it was like a whole thing. And I was the fourth student enrolled in that school. And then the rest is history. So that's how I got into the beauty industry. It was really like guidance and serendipity and all these like really beautiful things. And actually, one of the first times like I listened to myself fully. And so, yeah, that's my story on how I got in.
Did you find that it was hard to make that jump? Because a lot of times when we have, it seems like as kids, especially, we always are like trying to, I mean, get the approval of our parents. It's so much easier to just do whatever they tell us to do. Can you talk about like what it felt like for you to step out and be like, no, I think this is my path? Like, how did you feel, and how did you have the courage? Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting things coming up because I'm going to kind of divert just really quickly because my astrologer last year was like, there's something happening in your life right now that is specifically tied to June of, I think it was 2015. He was like, when you were 23. And that was literally the month I decided to go to hair school and enrolled in July. And I think like with the question that you just asked, like it was twofold. Like, yes, I was scared to talk to my dad because my parents had invested a lot of money into a private college. I was 3 years in, I was doing really well, but I was like directionless. I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. And like, I can't do something that like my heart is not in. Like, I can't dive into a future that I'm not committed to. And I remember feeling that level of commitment when I made the choice to go to beauty school. And so the hard conversations got a lot easier because I was like locked and loaded and aligned with it. And so I actually remember sitting on the bed with my dad and I was like, so I've made a decision. And I think in his mind, it wasn't really like my decision to make because I was still a child. And in my mind, I'm like, no, this is like not a question. Like, this is what I'm doing with my life. And so it was like this weird kind of like turning point into almost like adulthood of like, oh, I'm an autonomous human being. I get to make my choices. I get to move in this direction. And a lot of the fear fell away. Like, I knew I was going to do it. And like, I think like right now in the transitions that I've had over the last 2 years, I'm struggling to find that alignment. And like, I know it's coming. I can feel it like in the ether. And I'm like, oh, I've done this before. So actually, what you just asked was like a really good reminder. I'm like, that's the feeling. I feel like these decisions that like take off and rocket ship us into the next level, cause the quantum leaps. Like, there's that feeling like standing in your power and saying what you need to say. Like, it may have a little bit of fear, or you may be concerned about what other people think, but it doesn't quite matter nearly as much when you've got that alignment. And so I can remember the feeling of being a little scared and tiptoeing, and my dad being like, he had this kind of story, which we've now since addressed this like 20 years later, but it's like you never finish what you start. And you like thought I was making a flaky decision. And I kind of internalized that to some degree, but I also had this other voice that's like, that's not true. Like, this is right. And sometimes you have to walk away from something really big to get something even bigger. And so, yeah, it was an interesting process. I remember a lot of people thinking I was making like a really odd decision. And I just had to stand in that and be okay with it. So, yeah,
I think
it was an
that's
interesting experience. Yeah.
That's such a great reminder because it reminds me so much of our journeys too, where you were 3 years into a really fancy college and you decided, I'm going to change the direction of my life completely. And it put your dad in a tizzy. I decided I'm not going to take this full ride, top 5%, whatever, to college. I'm going to go to beauty school. My parents are like, but hold on, like, you're the smartest one. You should be going to college. And I just said, I'm so smart that I'm not going to get myself trapped in that. I'm going to follow what I love. So the fact that you brought up following your heart, I think When you activate that thing that lights you up, no other outside influence can really dominate over that feeling of hard nips, full body alignment chills, where you're like, this is the thing for me, even though I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I just know this is the direction I have to go, despite what my parents have to say, despite what my partner has to say. So I love that you talked about following your heart and that being the driving factor to kind of push fear to the side and say, but this is what I want to do, even though I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So you start beauty school, you've gone mostly, spent most of your time in college, did beauty school. How did your hair career turn into education? Because we all start out as creatives and just wanted to make things look pretty, but you quickly have risen to the top in our industry as a go-to expert. And in fact, if you want to talk full circle, I remember sitting in one of your classes at Hair Love Retreat in 2021, and I came up to you and said, if you don't have a podcast, you need one. Like, your voice is amazing and your education is on point. Like, you just bring a beautiful perspective. So what, 3 years later, here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way I got into education, sorry, I was like deep in memory of hair love for a second, switch gears in my brain. The way I got into education, I think it came naturally. Like, it actually happened in school really easily. I realized very quickly that I thought very differently than most of the people I was surrounded by. And then we ended up doing this kind of, I don't know if it was like Myers-Briggs or something like that in school. And all of my like brain direction was strategic, math, logic, very like linear. And everyone else was like body kinesthetic and musical. And so I was the one, they were like, I don't get this chemical thing. Can you explain this to me? And I was like, oh yeah, the covalent bond and the da 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 da. Like, I got like super into the chemistry of it, and I wanted to understand really complicated things and be able to explain them simply. And so that was always like a goal, because like I remember a quote, I think it was Albert Einstein. It was like, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. And I'm like, okay, that was always like my goal for myself. And so I started doing that for other people in school, and other things made sense where they kind of like always just kind of attracted to me. And then I became like kind of the second teacher. And it's a way for me to learn too. Like, it like solidified my own knowledge. So that was something I realized really quickly that I understood, or that I understood and I liked to do in school. And so when I graduated, I was like, I want to teach, and I don't know what this looks like. And of course, there was like the allure of the education industry, which some of it is a little smoke and mirror. Like, it's not always what it looks like, but I recognized there was an opportunity in this to do something, one that I loved, and also like helped other hairdressers. And I saw some holes in our industry where I'm like, there's not enough presence of like really diving into fundamentals. Like, a lot of it was like artistic and exciting and like very showy, which is fun and inspirational. But I was like, I'm kind of the quiet one. Like, I'm the one who's going to tell you like how to do a really good like highlight, not like how to, cut someone's hair with a fork, kind of thing. And so I struggled a little in the beginning of education, because I had a presence, but it wasn't the same as everyone else. And so I kind of diminished myself, and I'm like, well, I'm just this and I'm just that. And then what I realized through feedback and social media was those classes actually made a huge impact on real life and like business, and someone being able to like, foil at an efficient pace, or really understand like placement and fall or formulation, like change their life long term, versus like giving them kind of a short burst of inspiration. And just to be clear, like, I think there's room for both, and I think there should be both. And so I just learned really early on, like, I had a talent for it and there was a need for it. And like, I just went into it. And because I was different, what I first thought was like a weakness. And I was like, oh, I should be louder. I should dress differently. I should have crazy hair. Like, all the things that made me different actually are what built my audience to begin with. And so it was a process of embracing that, and like not trying to assimilate into an industry that really is designed to embrace everybody. So that's how I got into education. And it was something I realized like when social media came up. This is actually something I haven't given myself acknowledgement for, and I'm actually really proud of. In 2013, there were a few influencers on the scene, and a lot of them were sharing their work, but they weren't sharing their formulas. They weren't talking about what they were actually doing. And I remember watching a live once, and one of the influencers was like, no, we don't share formulas. That's proprietary. Like, go figure it out yourself. And I was like, but like, why? like what is it going to hurt? And so I remember I got published for a bleach transformation. I did like a full global color correction, and I was like, I'm going to spill everything, like every single step, every single mistake, every single like whatever. And it felt so freeing to be like so unbelievably honest. And that's actually, it won me an award. I got a bunch of attention. I like gained 10,000 followers in the matter of like 2 weeks. And this is when Instagram was like very different. It was like you get reposted, you get all the things. And it wasn't really about the attention. I realized how big of a difference it made in hairdressers' lives for someone to be honest about how hard it actually is to do some of these transformations versus like just showing the ease of it. And so that really set the tone for the rest of my education career. I was like, I'm just going to be like unbelievably honest and put myself in a position where like, if I say something, it's got a level of trust to it that it's the real story. And so that's what I've tried to do in education.
Well, you certainly have. And I love that you brought that up, because as you were talking about being a different type of educator back in the day, I immediately thought, well, I used to go to your page and look at color transformations and how you would like color correct and what was the process in that whole formula. So the fact that you literally just brought that particular thing up, I think really speaks to stay in your lane and know, and do the thing that your talents and your gifts and your creativity and your mind and all of that come together. I mean, in 2013, I felt the same call. Like, I need to start educating, but like not another balayage placement. I need to teach you how to set boundaries with you and your clients so that you don't feel drained at the end of the day. So I love that we're, 11 years in the future, looking back like, wow, we really set a foundation so that we could have all the crazy wild hair or this or a success, or I mean, everything that we're teaching, from our self-care basics to the basics of how you formulate and how long it sits on and all the placement, like all of that are the tools that we use as we evolve and get into that next level of creative expression. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, and I'm gonna touch on a few of the big things in case anybody missed them while you're talking about them. One is that there is a voice inside of you that guides you, and you have to learn to listen to that voice. And the best way to do it is just start tuning in. Like, what is my body telling me? How am I feeling in my soul? And a lot of times that will guide you. Just like you said, like your parents or other people will try to influence what you do, but there's something inside that just goes, it's different. Something's different than that. Second thing is that you don't have to be like everybody else. You don't
Please don't.
You don't have to be extroverted. Like, I'm not bubbly like Brit is. Brit's when we show up to places, Brit's wearing sparkles. Her hair's always, I mean, everywhere we go, someone's going to comment on how she looks. I mean, we're not going to get into a room where someone doesn't say something about her hair. And I don't look like that. And I don't need to. And it's okay to stay in your own lane. Doesn't matter if you're an extrovert. Doesn't matter if you're an introvert. Doesn't matter any of those things. If you focus on good training, if you focus on things that matter to other people, that made a difference in your life and can teach other people, that's what people want to know. You don't have to be showy. You don't have to be flashy unless that's you. And if that's you, hell yeah, like lean into that hard. But the reality is that as leaders, it's up to us to figure out how do we deliver our gifts. And there's not really a blueprint because nobody's really like you. I mean, yeah, I can see what some people are doing, but
And we're blazing new trails that have never been created. So there's no path to wherever we're headed.
So I've got a question, because there's a lot of people who want to be leaders, but don't know how. Like they lack the confidence, they lack the pizzazz, they lack the charisma. What do you say to somebody who thinks, I have some sort of skill or talent, I'm starting to recognize that people are starting to ask me, and I want to step up, but I don't necessarily have the internal stuff going on in my head to allow me to do that? What do you tell that person?
Well, I think that's a loaded question, because there's so many different directions. And I think it's simple and complicated at the same time. Because I think the simple answer is like leaning into like your own level of authenticity and who you are, and like standing in that. And like, I remember kind of like, tapping onto what you were saying, like I remember like having to consciously do that throughout the journey of education, because I also had the voice inside my head, like, you're too quiet, you're too weird, you're too this, you're too that, like, and like no one's actually going to like you, or you don't have anything relevant to say, or someone else already did this, so like there's not space, like all the things. Like I could sit here and give you 2 hours of all the negative crap that was going on in my head, and I had to consciously counteract that and be like, no, like this is actually really important, and this is actually like what you have to say. And like I had to get to know myself really, really well and what my skill sets were. And I'm like, okay, so what is it? And I had to be objective about it. Like, it's like being humble, but also being confident. I think they go hand in hand. It's not being overinflated, but it's also, humility is not self-deprecation. It is not like talking, negatively to yourself. Humility is understanding like you could be really good, you could be the best in the room, and you don't have to make anyone else feel like crap about it. And so I really had to like go in and say, okay, I actually am really smart. Like I really understand these things very well. I can speak this way. And I had to like tap into my own like kind of like zones of genius and like be really okay with them and like stick to them in a way. And it's not about not growing or whatever, but the second I tried to divert and be someone else, like when I was on stage and I tried to be really bubbly and like got like tried to do something like wild or whatever, it didn't land, and it looked like a costume I was putting on, and like other people could feel it. And so I just had to be really okay being myself. I'm like, I'm going to be on the one on stage wearing a blazer. Like I'm going to be the one on stage like doing a foil. I'm not going to be loud. I'm not going to be like, I'll be funny, but it'll probably be a little subtle, like all of the things. And what I found is the more I got okay with it, one, the freer I felt and the more my personality came out. And then the second was other people were really, really drawn to it without me trying. And so that would be the first step. The second step is like considering like the audience as like a friend or like someone that you're actively trying to help for a reason, and like making it about them and not making it about you. And I remember I had a very pivotal moment. It was my first public speaking engagement to 2,000 people. Like I didn't like start off with like a class of 10. It was a big event. And it was while social media was still kind of new and my salon was doing really well with it. There was no format to like what to share or whatever. And it was me and one of my stylists. We were invited to speak at a Paul Mitchell event to like 2,000 people. And like, I was just our time kept getting reduced. It was like, oh, you have 45 minutes. It got reduced down to 5 minutes. And so we were like, yeah, we can't share this in 5 minutes. So we got our time back up to 10 because we got our presentation down to like a 10-minute thing. Like it was so like whittled down. We ended up, it went so well that we ended up doing a 30-minute Q&A because we got locked in ahead of time and we're like, all right, we had the pressure put on. And I remember calling my mom. This was like the pivotal moment. I was like, I am so nervous. Like we've had to condense this presentation down to 10 minutes. It feels really important to share, but like, I feel like we're not going to do a good job. I feel this like, and I had like some kind of other things kind of coming in. And she was just like, just remember the people in the audience are like your friends and you're there to help them. It was just such a simple thing, but I remember feeling like a shift in my energy, like in like my insides, where I'm like, oh, I'm just talking to a bunch of my friends. And like it took the pressure off to like have a conversation with someone. I think a lot of times, I think we can identify this in the education space. We see a lot of people that are up there and they're speaking out of ego. Like they're speaking to be seen and they're speaking to be recognized. They're not speaking to like connect and help. And like that has a very different energy. And there's very many educators that do speak to connect. But I think we know the difference. And I remember like locking into that feeling and I can like feel it in really specific places in my body. And I was just like, oh, they're my friends. Oh, I get to help them. And like it kind of created this level of excitement and a lot of the nerves just fell away. And it was probably one of the most early on impactful experiences I had in teaching. And so two things, like tap into your authenticity in a level. And I know authenticity is like kind of a buzzword, but it's like really like owning that. And then like really looking at your audience as people that are your friends and you're there to help. I think those two things kind of take away a lot of the roadblocks to being able to share something important, in my opinion.
I appreciate you sharing that story. And speaking on authenticity, it reminds me of the first time that I got asked to be on Good Morning Texas to teach about hair. I remember I was so nervous. I was like sweating, shaking, like about to pee myself. And I looked over to Chris and I was like, I need you to be my coach. Help. Like, I need advice right now. And he goes, babe, just be yourself. And I popped back so sassy and said, but that's too easy. And then that shift happened for me where I realized, oh my gosh, we're making it hard. We're trying and we don't even need to. We just show up and be ourselves and that's enough. And I remember that was the moment where I called all my power back to say, I am okay just as I am. I don't have to pretend or be anything or do anything or say something special. I just need to speak from the heart and be myself. And that was enough. And so I love that you shared that turning point moment for you, because I too had that experience where it was like, oh, it actually can be easy. Why are we making this so hard?
Yeah,
Well,
and I also want to ask a question about becoming a leader. When you're in that leadership role, and people are putting a lot of faith into you, because once you join into a leadership role, it seems like people just come out of the woodwork asking you for help. I mean, it's just one of those. Once you get good and once you accept the role, it's just like, holy, I didn't realize there were this many people existed. I don't have this many friends. Like, where are they coming from? How do you deal with the pressure of other people looking to you for that kind of advice? How do you deal with it internally, of realizing like a lot of people are relying on me, like they're looking to me for life advice, they're looking to me for career advice. How do you personally deal with that?
yeah, I think again, there's like multiple facets to the answer. I think number one, it's like not overtaking responsibility. Like I think leadership is a level of a guide. And like I think sometimes what happens is, and I've done this myself, where you can get slightly overinflated in your position. All of a sudden you're like, oh, it's all on me and I have to have all the answers. And sometimes we push ourselves farther in our minds and we're like, okay, well, I'm going to pretend that I know all these things. And you're giving answers that are not always actually true. And so I think like number one is like being really honest with where you're at. And like, I know that I've taken like steps in my maturity, like the more comfortable I am with saying I don't know something. Like I remember being in, you know, a really big class, Redken exchange on stage, color correction as the expert. And someone asked me a question and I like started to kind of guess at an answer. And I was like, but I'm not sure. So I like stopped and I was like, I'm going to give you what I think, but I don't know that this is true. Like, so like we can all look at this together. And I remember even like we Googled things together and like someone came up and like, they were like, that was really refreshing. Like that was really powerful for you to let. And I remember not really even thinking, like looking back at it, I didn't even think anything of it because it felt comfortable to say that. Cause I'm like being like radically honest in that moment with like your own limitations or what you know, I think is really, really important. Being open about like successes and failures, like keeps everything like real and it keeps you from overtaking responsibility. And I think just really having, I mean, sometimes too, it involves having clear boundaries. Like, I think sometimes people will kind of, if there is like a vacuum we create of like being needed, because being needed feels good, people will go into that. And so I think leadership is really valuable, really important, and a really like honorable position to be in. Like, it's sacred to be in a position of leadership. But I think we can also use it to fulfill other things that sometimes can create like maybe a level of codependency or a level of like overinflated. So I think it's finding the balance to that and really, I think like radical honesty, I think clear boundaries and like not overtaking responsibility. Like I know I've had like on social media, like just say for like color specifically, people will reach out and be like, I have this guest and I have these pictures and I have these formulations. And I remember I would sit there for like 30 minutes trying to explain a full color service. And I got to a point, I'm like, that's actually a disservice. Like I could give them like really like high level like points of like how I would think about it. But like to try and formulate it for them, like, and it doesn't turn out, like that puts me in a weird position. And so it like created this kind of separation where I'm like, that's not actually my responsibility. And it's not actually helping them to do that, even though I like had this drive to do all the things. And so that's something I consider in any position, like whether it's, you know, training stylist or helping someone on social media or when I'm in coaching sessions, it's like, what is for their greater good? And like, ultimately it's helping them think through their own process or think their own thoughts versus me giving them an answer. And so I think sometimes leadership also gets mistaken for giving people answers when it's really like, here's some information that like you may not know because I'm slightly more experienced in this area, or this is the learning curve I went through. And then like helping them formulate their thoughts and decisions, like it kind of keeps you co-creators versus like, you know, I'm going to tell you what to do kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it takes the hierarchy out of it and just it allows them to be your friend. Like, hey, I have some tools that might help you see how you want to apply them and use them, because it really feels like leadership is about embodying your tools, talents, and authenticity in your own life and setting an example for others to go, oh, hey, that's possible for me too. But you give them the space to get there on your own. You kind of have to learn all the things on your own. So otherwise you don't integrate it in as if that was your wisdom. It's just like borrowed. It's kind of like when your mom tells you not to touch the hot stove, you're like, not true until I do it. And then you're like, okay, now I know we're not doing that. So One thing you talked about is stepping up as a leader. I really feel like leading our own life is where we're all being called, where we have to take radical responsibility for the changes that we want to experience in our life. One thing that I've really loved in watching your journey over the last few years is you taking that radical responsibility of saying, you know what, there are some things in my life that I want to make changes around. There are parts of my past that I want to leave behind. Can you kind of, can we turn the chapter and talk about what your journey of self-discovery and finding your authenticity, coming out, leaving behind religion, like there's a whole scroll of things that you have been working through. And I'd love to kind of just jump into that realm of self-discovery and development.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, I think in hindsight now, I can see the building blocks that like kind of created this process that have happened probably over the last decade. But in my mind, it like started like 2.5 years ago, because that's where I felt like the shift. And that's, I think, very often what happens in our lives. It's like we can look back and see the things that created like the skill set that we needed to be able to show up in these like really transformational times in our lives. And so I think it's amazing to look back. But I would say probably 2.5, 3 years ago, I started like tapping into like different things outside of myself for healing. Like I started like, reading more, exploring more, listening more. And then probably 2 years ago, it got ramped up into a different level where I was like, oh, I think, there's some things that I want to do in the coaching world. I'm going to go get some certifications. And so mostly it kind of started like an external thing. And so it started with neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy. I was seeing a hypnotherapist. And it started opening little doors up where I'm like, oh, this is how the brain works. Or like some of these things that I was told like that were harmful to a spiritual sense from a traditional religion perspective, were actually really like eye-opening, like especially hypnotherapy was like one of the probably the biggest things. I had a hypnotherapist that I saw for about 2 years when I was going through like an incredibly stressful time. I had just moved to Tampa, had gone through a like really significant divorce, was excommunicated from my church, which I was trying to get back to at the time. And I was from a small town. The divorce was really terrible. My ex spread a lot of love. It was like this whole thing where I was just like, I gotta go. Like, so like I like left Missouri, went to Tampa, literally started my life from like zero. I was like living with my grandmother, kind of thing. And so I had to really build myself back up. Like that was, one of the many times. And I think this is part of the triple Scorpio is like the like constant transformation of like, you're gonna die, you're gonna set yourself on fire, and then you're gonna like do all the things. And I'm like, can we stop? No, I'm just kidding. But that was one of the big ones. And so I was in this process of like, trying to like really at that time, I didn't realize like regulate my nervous system. I was like in such heightened stressed response all the time. And so I ended up seeing a hypnotherapist. And I remember one of the biggest like takeaways that I had, she did this whole visualization. She's like, you're going to go into a pyramid. There's a big treasure, like, and you're going to get the things that you need out of the treasure. And my brain like represented all these qualities as like these huge gemstones. So it was like focus was like this big citrine. And I was like, there's something missing. And it ended up being courage, which was like a big heart-shaped like tourmaline. And I remember just like holding it. And like it was so pivotal because when I started looking into like the word courage and like where it sits on the hierarchy of emotions, it's like it's kind of like the transition point between like the low vibe and the high vibe, which I always have like issues like labeling things high and low, but like whatever. But it was like the transition point into like really moving into the next level of like of my life, of being able to embody different things. And that's when we opened the salon in Tampa, and there was a lot of like external success and things. And like I worked so hard externally. And then I kind of went back into like a little bit of a regression. I got accepted back into the church, and I was like really trying hard to like, connect with my family that I was disconnected from for 3 years. And I ended up like really squashing myself down again. And like, I remember just being like, this does not like every time you expand and then contract again, the contraction is significantly more uncomfortable. It's like, oh, I don't fit here anymore. And so I spent a few years in that, like dealt with like really severe anxiety because I had like put myself back in a position that I really didn't know at the time, but my body did not want to be in. It was like rejecting it. I was like breaking out in hives every day. It was like all of these things. And so a few years in of that, of like, and what I learned is it takes me a few years to learn some of these really big things. I'm very loyal. I'll stick through some really uncomfortable situations, and that is getting less and less as I get older. But I tried and it didn't work. And I was like, this is like, I need something else. And so I really started seeking deeper healing. I started using some plant medicine. I started working with a lot of different modalities. I was surrounding myself with people that were doing the work, and it felt so different in my body. And I started to feel like I was living this like weird double life. Like I had this life of like, where I was supposed to be like religious and like perform and do these things. And I wasn't actually doing it, but I was doing it just enough to be accepted by my community. And then I was like living this life that felt really authentic and open and exciting and expansive and having these really beautiful conversations. And it just got to a tipping point where I was like, I cannot live in both. Like my body was rejecting it. My mind felt split. I felt like I was kind of being dishonest on both sides. And so it culminated in me leaving the church. It's been almost a full year, but I kind of withdrew about a year before that. And a lot of other things came out with that. Like, I had a shift in my actually not a shift, but like actually being able to admit like my sexuality, which was like a big deal because like that was super rejected in the church. Knowing that I left the church voluntarily kind of put me into what they call like the apostate, which is like that and being gay are like the top two sins. Like, and so like there was a big choice to make, and it was like live in this like contracted state, which ultimately I think would have killed me. Like I was compressing myself so much at a level that like it was physically making me ill. Like my level of inflammation, like my depression, my anxiety, all of those things I think were symptoms of me just being somewhere I shouldn't have been. And that transition was hard and it was scary and there was a lot of loss, but it was kind of like in line with different stakes. But leaving college and going to beauty school, it was like I knew it was the right thing. So like the scariness and the loss ended up being okay with me. And like I got to a point of acceptance where I'm like, everyone's got to do what they have to do in this situation. Like everyone's got to stay aligned with what feels right for them. And so yeah, that's been a huge transition over the last couple of years. A lot of loss, a lot of ups and downs. So, but
I always say that hypnosis and mushrooms are the two main factors in my spiritual transformation and developing my psychic abilities. And thank God I married a hypnotist of practicing for 25 years, and I've been 18 years of that experimentation. So I love that you just went straight into the deep end with hypnosis, NLP, and plant medicine, because those are like some high level transformative tools. And I feel like she said hypnosis, I felt your whole body just like, you just got hard. You're like, oh my God, talk about it. So I feel like just carry on.
What do you feel like hypnosis allowed you to discover? Maybe about yourself, but also about, I'll call it a deeper spirituality. Like, what did you discover doing it? I mean, like she said, I've done, it's 10,000 plus sessions at this point. So it's such a fascinating thing. It's phenomenal. I mean, for anyone who has not tried hypnosis, you got to get on board. I mean, it's one of those things that just opens you up in ways I can't really describe into words. But since you're actually like a person who's done it, and it's not my influence from Britt.
You're not fucking her.
What? What would you say? What would you say you learned about yourself or learned about the world?
Is really interesting because I don't think I understood this at the time, but I think in hindsight now, like this was a long time ago. It's probably like 9 years ago where I started it. I think it was two things. I think now that I know the level of religious conditioning I was under of 40 years of being in this church and like understanding the tactics that they used essentially to brainwash us. I mean, I'm calling it a church. It is actually deemed a cult in many countries and they've lost their religious designation. So like when I'm talking about like religious indoctrination, I'm talking at like that level. Like there was such a massive level of control and brainwashing. So I'm not just talking about like run of the mill, like, you know, churches. This was like kind of a different level of indoctrination. So I think number one, in hindsight, I'm recognizing that it allowed me to like feel my own thoughts and intuition for one of the first times probably ever in my life, like exclusively, where I was like, my body and my brain were like falling into a state of actually being able to experience myself without the conditioning. Like somehow it bypassed that. And so I think like opening that door, I didn't know what it was at the time, but I'm like, I believe that. Like, and it doesn't feel wrong. And like, there was this whole conversation within the church of like yoga and hypnotherapy and meditation all being like gateways to the devil kind of thing. It's like you're opening your mind to Satan or whatever. So I couldn't talk about it with my friends, but like I was always like enough of a rebel that I'm like, I'm going to try it. Like, we're going to see, like, maybe the devil's in there, but I don't think so, you know, kind of thing. And it was a really safe space. It was a really safe person. And I took to it. Like I went into hypnotherapy first session, super quick, super easy. And I was like floating above my body. Like I went into the whole thing and I came out of it and felt better, not worse. I felt safe, not scared. Like all of these things. And I was like, I had enough internal knowledge to be like, oh, that's not wrong. That's not bad. And so I think it opened the door for me to embrace, understand, and believe my own internal state in an environment that I have been like constantly taught to question it. It's like, you know, your heart is treacherous. You cannot lean on your own understanding. Like these were all the messages. It's like, you know, everything in human nature was wrong, bad, scary, leading to sin. And I'm like, but I just gave myself a really big gift over here. Like I saw something that I needed, like my body showed up, my brain like gave me answers and I feel peaceful. Like this ain't jiving over here. So I think it was like, it opened the door to me starting to question some of those things without me actually even knowing I was questioning it. And I think like we have so many answers, like, and I remember there was a journey I was in, and the message that came through, which I've actually heard now that it comes through a lot of people. It's not about learning. It's not about knowledge. It's about remembering. It's like it's all inside of us already. And I think like it opened the door for a remembrance where I started to like start to feel things aligned in my body where I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel right. Like, and I allowed myself to question it for the first time. Like it gave me that gift. And like, I didn't recognize the fruition of it till like probably like 7 years later. Like it took that other things like stacking on top of it. And it just like created a connection that was a divine connection that wasn't reliant on a church channel that was like adulterated. And so, yeah, it did a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a profound thing, and it's interesting, especially the way you're talking about it. It's a truth about hypnosis that a lot of people don't understand, and that is the fact that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. Like you're not going into someone's control or something weird like that. It's about discovering something deeper inside yourself that, you know, we live almost in this prison of belief. And a lot of times our beliefs are given to us versus something that we've discovered. And what I like about hypnosis is it's this self-discovery of a knowingness. It's almost like the belief doesn't even matter, because people are like, oh, do you believe that or not? When you feel it, when you experience it on the inside, you're like, I don't believe it. I know it. It's a knowing that I have inside of me, and I let that guide my life. And it's a completely different way to live. It's such a shame that it's not taught in schools. That's something that I've been working on lately. Just to, it's so easy to like overcome confidence issues, public speaking issues, like all those kinds of like habit control sort of stuff that we should all be equipped with. It's such a shame that most people don't know how to use it. We have such a powerful brain, and hypnosis is just a body of technique to help you use it. I mean, that's really what it is. It's you're making me so happy over here, just because, you know, to come out of a situation where we do get indoctrinated, and even if
no matter what religion you're brought up in.
Yeah, 100% indoctrination.
Or where you go to school or who your parents are, like there's a level of indoctrination that always happens, even if people are trying to do your highest good, even when they have like the best of intentions and they just want to help you and stuff like that. It's still indoctrination. It's still you not choosing. And I think the second that we get behind our own driver's wheel and take everything off autopilot and go like, well, what the hell do I want to be?
Yeah, what do I want?
There's so much power in that, and it just helps you be a better human. It helps you be better to yourself. It helps you be better to your partner, and just the way that you interface with the world. It's like the world's not scary anymore. You don't feel like separate from it. I feel like you go more into it.
You have full body chills right now.
I love this. It's such a topic that I love. You know, I really don't talk about it enough, and it's just incredible to see. You know, and you mentioned too plant medicine. I feel like hypnosis is such a tool to allow you to open your mind to say, maybe there are other things out there. Maybe there are some things that would really benefit me if I would just try them for a moment. And if they don't work, ditch them. I mean, obviously, but to open the mind enough to be willing to say there are other modalities. Maybe we haven't been given all the tools that exist. Maybe there are more aisles in the Home Depot of our lives that we can grab onto that would make huge benefits, and not just, you know, in our careers, but in our personal lives, because self-discovery is the most important thing. I mean, no matter how many accolades you get or where you go to school or how much money you get, it matters zero if you don't ever understand the person who you're walking with your entire life.
Yeah, if you don't feel joy, then what's the point?
It's a thumbs down. Yeah.
You know, a question that has been coming through as you were talking, it sounds like through reflection, you do a lot of hindsight realization of like, oh, this has been happening. This has been going on. It's been there the whole time in my present moment. The question that keeps coming through is, I wonder what you're currently experiencing now that your future self will look back and say, hey, during this time I was going through that. So I'm curious, is there a realm in your mind that you can future pace and look back to this moment and go, hey, this is what we're going through right now. This is what I'm curious about. This is what I'm learning. So what stage are you in now?
Ooh, well, yeah, a big one. I actually just had a call with, she was a former coach of mine, but she's now one of my close friends. And she was just like, oh, sweetheart, you're going through an initiation right now. And I'm like, no, like I'm tired. It's like, I'm tired, grandpa. Like, yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I've gone through it. Like, I think that there is a lot of things coming up, multiple things, that are really big themes that I'm being called to like deconstruct and disassemble and figure out, essentially the choices I want to make with them. Like, how do I actually want to like embody, live, and like, do I want to continue along these paths? A lot of it is around dealing with grief, heartbreak, loss. I mean, that's been super present. The last year has been literally one extreme loss after another. And when I start to look at like the totality of my life, there has not been a pillar of my life that has been untouched. I moved to a different state. I lost my dog. My family like is no longer, for the most part, speaking to me. All my childhood friends are gone. I moved to a new community where I have to like literally start from scratch. I was in a long-term partnership that ended, and like there's things like that have just literally like swept. I'm figuring out my relationship with God and spirituality and a lot of different levels. And so grief and heartbreak were really interesting, where I like started like looking at what does that actually mean, and like what is like the kind of put on version of like where we think grief needs to live in our lives. And a lot of times we're like, it turns into time frames and this and that. And I'm realizing like the cyclical nature of everything, like the spiral of it. I'm like, sometimes I'm fine and sometimes I'm a mess. Sometimes I'm like this and sometimes I'm that. So like, I think part of this is accepting that like everything is kind of both all the time. Like, and it can be multiple things, and it doesn't have to be a singular experience, because I'm like, oh, I'm in mourning, I'm in grief, I'm in this. And it's like, oh, wait, I'm feeling this at the present moment, and it's probably going to be gone soon. And like, so like it's a lot of the messaging we're seeing around regulating our nervous system and healing through trauma and things. It's like allowing what is at that moment to be. And I have gotten a lot better about putting myself in a position to be able to process what I need to process, saying yes to things, saying no. I have put myself through a lot of different healing modalities, like in the last 3 months, like at a different level, like working at things on a brain level, like working through like a lot of complex trauma, things like that. And so there's a lot of initiation that are like dealing with like the core wounds of things. So another thing that has come up is shame, like dealing with a lot of shame. And I actually had that come up, like I'm fully into like all the stuff. So like I had an Akashic record reading And one of the things that came up was about a life that I lived that was shameless, and like getting back to a place of like being in full expression of like femininity, and like dealing, like being in that space without shame. And a lot of like shame, guilt, inferiority, insecurity things like have shown up where I can see that that's impacted my relationship. So like reflecting on the relationship that ended and like looking at what I contributed to that, like has been such a huge reflection on love of how do you, you know, love from a place that is not wounded. Like all humans have wounds, all humans have trauma, like we all experience different things, but it's like being able to manage that in a way where like we take enough responsibility and we're not perpetually putting that on someone else to fix it. And so I can look at all these things that like I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. But it's like each thing has come in like, I'm going to say phases, but it's more like massive tidal waves slapping me in the face, like, you know, over and over again. Where each level, and it's coming at like such a rapid pace. I'm like, so there is like a level of initiation happening right now where it's like, you're going to get through this and you're going to get through it quickly. And so I feel like I'm bobbing up for air and then like another one. But I also feel like I built a body that has the capacity to do this. And I don't know how I lucked out where I have a few months where I'm not actively working or traveling or anything. And so I've been able to dive into some of this healing at like a different level. And so I don't know where it's going or what it's doing, but it's happening. And so that's kind of what's going on right now. Yeah.
You know, something you said reminded me of a practice that I do every year on my birthday. And I write myself a birthday card and I write about what I'm learning, what I'm experiencing, what am I celebrating this year. And in 2021, I'll never forget, I wrote to myself, life is simultaneously good and bad at the same time, happy and sad. I realize it's not one or the other, just as you said. It's not like, oh, we're riding this wheel of fortune and life way up high and it's great, and then we dip down. It's simultaneously happening. Whereas my business was blowing up and all this impact and influence and all the things I've been working so hard for are unfolding with ease. And then my dad died. It's like, well, shit, like, how do I celebrate like being named a top soul coach and a best vegan salon in my town, blah, blah, blah. Like, how do I celebrate that while I'm literally so sad? So I think the fact that you've come to that realization, that you brought that up, is a great reminder for all of us to not wait to celebrate. It's about enjoying the journey now. That's why I love that joy is literally written in the word journey. It's the beginning and the end, Joy. So it's like, how can we bring the joy into these journeys of ups and downs? Because it's never going to be steady. It's never going to be like, okay, we healed and now everything's perfect. It's great. I mean, I've done thousands and thousands of hours of hypnosis and changing the subconscious, reading Akashic records, past life regressions. I've done all of it, and it still doesn't take away the fact that I feel sad when my cat died, or that I'm about to be sad when we put our dog down. Like, it doesn't get taken away just because you have the tools. You have the tools to be able to manage it happening to you in the present moment. So I just love that you brought that up, because I think people need to recognize we don't need to wait to find joy, even when our external world feels chaotic.
Well, and I think it's interesting because I think one of the things I realized is like chasing happiness usually like creates this perpetual cycle and you'll never actually reach it. It's like we always like chase the positive emotions, or we chase like the high end of the spectrum. And that's why I say like high and low. It's like the human experience is actually like, it's all of it. It's the whole thing, and everything lives on a spectrum. And like the choice to like be at peace, be neutral, to find joy, and like to see joy in certain things, like it also comes at the of being able to be in the sadness. Like the joy doesn't happen without like embracing the sadness. It's like the less we embrace the sadness, the less we actually get to feel the joy. And I experienced that like really I don't want to say early on, but it was like one of the most transformational points in my like when I started going through like really looking at my emotions, was embracing my anger. And I went through this whole process with one of my coaches. We went through this trauma release of something that happened when I was really, really young, that like did not realize impacted me the way it did. And like, I have this like thing where it's like, we'll go through the process and then it doesn't actually come out of my body till like 12 hours later. So like, I woke up the next morning and I was like, I am like raging. Like and I had not let myself like express anger. Everything was kept in a very tight loop because, you know, this is what good girls do. This is what good people do. It's like, you don't have this, you don't have that. And like, I remember like just like literally raging for like 6 hours. Like I was just like hitting and angry and screaming. And then I was done. I was like, like sitting there crying, all the things. And it was like massive anger burn. It was like the first time that like things actually like felt pleasurable and joyful again on the other end of that. I realized how dampened that side had become because I had repressed the anger so much. And I was I'm like, why does this feel so good? Like, what is like, it was like all of a sudden, like that side opened. And so, like, everything's on the spectrum. So, like, allowing ourselves to feel sadness and like, this is part of the work I'm doing now. It's like, I can't run from the grief. If I run from the sadness, I don't get the joy on the other side. And so, I think it's such a beautiful thing to like recognize both because it one side opens up the other and vice versa. And I'm like learning how to actually embrace the sadness and like fully feel it, and it shortens the duration. I feel like a lot of depression comes from like repressing it and like not actually feeling it. It's like we start to numb and it's still there, it doesn't go away. Obviously not a diagnosis, that's been my experience with it. And but I don't know, I think like being able to experience both, so it's like I always view things almost like horizontally. It's like they're all kind of on the same axis, and like where we get to feel them is dependent on what's going on. So it's like we can be sad about losing a pet and we can be happy about this, and they both exist at the same time. And I think that that is it's such a big body to have to be able to hold both at the same time. And it's like such a skill to learn. And I don't know. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like the beauty of life, because we're here in this human experience. We know that we're going to lose people. The second that, and the big hard lesson is the fact that you're going to lose everything. We're going to lose the businesses that we build. We're going to lose the health that we work so hard for. We're going to lose the partners that we grow to, deeply love, the animals, everything. We are constantly in a state of losing it. And the faster that we can get on board with the fact that that's what's going to happen doesn't diminish the fact that we should do any less. Like, I'm not going to love any less just because I know eventually I will lose Brit. No matter what happens in our life, eventually it will go away. And like knowing that it's ending, though, a lot of times forces you to be in the present moment. Because if you just focus on the ending, life's going to suck the whole time. But the second that you go, like, I know that that's happening, but I'm okay with being right here, and it almost lets you off the hook. And almost let you know, and to your point about the emotions, I always think about the emotions as a pendulum. And like, if you want to swing real far out to happy and bring that ball real far out here, well, guess what's going to eventually happen? You're going to eventually not be able to sustain it. If you've ever hung out with a person that's really manic and they're always excited all the time, they're always really high energy, and then you see them in the down moments, you're like, oh my God, this sucks. Like, I'm watching you and this sucks for you. It's because they wanted to be so high. And I think, to your point, staying in that center calm space and allowing things not to move you so much, knowing that emotions really are just waves and they're going to constantly hit the shore. And if you try to hold on to them, it's going to be almost impossible, no matter which one you're grabbing onto. Sadness, if you're grabbing onto happiness, no matter what it is. But the second that you can just be there and watch them, it's almost like you pull automatically into that observer experience. You say, I'm just living. I'm just watching what's going on. And it's okay because I know it's all going to happen. I know it's all going to unfold the way that it should be.
Yeah, shifting from victim mentality to the witness mentality puts you into the present moment instead of analyzing like, well, why is this happening to me? What, putting you in that like a resistance. And they say what you resist persists, so it's important to embrace and accept all that you're feeling and know that it is not always going to be that way. Something you said earlier made me think of what my mom always said, this too shall pass. So knowing that even though you feel grief or sadness or joy or whatever, it's all a fleeting, like coming in, coming out, like ocean waves. So I love the idea of just walking that middle ground. And that's why I reach for joy instead of happiness, because I learned that happiness is an external, dependent on circumstances or the reflection of your reality. Whereas joy is just a centered peace, a state of peace. And like, I feel good no matter what's happening outside of me. And I think that feels great.
Feels really good.
There's something about joy too that like feels like a choice. It's like being able to find joy in many circumstances. It's like, even like in loss, it's like the joy is like to choose to reflect on the beautiful parts. And it's like you can give that to yourself at any time. And like I think that that's really empowering. And I agree. I feel like joy feels very centered. Like it's like that kind of neutral place where we're choosing to see things a certain way. And that was one of the biggest lessons I learned too. It's like really like being aware of the stories in my head and like what's mine, what's external, like what do I actually have a choice to think? And there's been times I've literally had like these conversations where I'm like, no, like I don't want to think that anymore. I don't. And it's like you have to like really look at it from that perspective. And the second, like I feel like there's an empowered choice to be made. Like it can change the game as long as the practice is there. And that's, I think sometimes the hard part is practicing that on the daily basis. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of a huge lesson I teach inside of Shine School, my program on reclaiming your power and your confidence. That says that you are only as strong as the story you tell yourself. And so it truly, like, your worth, your value, your confidence all stem from a label that you've given yourself. Whether you accepted it from someone else, you still had that ultimate say of like, I'm gonna embody being a bitch, being fat, being a whore, being stupid, being poor, whatever that negative, not good enough, like, oh my God, we could go on forever. We all have those negative labels that we carry around, but it's taking that conscious choice and saying, you know what, I recognize that I allowed this and now I'm going to choose to change it. And I think that's where empowerment comes from, is recognizing you do have the choice. That's why I'm obsessed with Dorothy's sparkly red shoes, because to me, not only is it pretty, but it also represents a decision that she made. And that changed everything. And so it's beautiful to see you making these firm, clear, definite decisions in your life that are altering the course in which you're going. Like who I met in 2021 in person to who I'm talking to today is radically different. And it's like the most beautiful thing to witness, because you're not different in like I don't know, in a different kind of way, but it's like you're just more comfortable being who you are and taking the walls down. I think that's really what it is the walls that were there to protect us as children no longer serve. And as we have the courage to take them down, I think that's when we can allow our authenticity to shine and release the mask.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that comes with releasing fear. Like, I think that that's been a big part of the process. I think like what I learned was early on in my life, I was really good at creating enough connection with people that like felt connected, but I was still able to really hold back a part of myself. And that's because I was afraid of being myself. I was afraid of like what someone would think, or I was afraid of doing something wrong or whatever. And like the more I move towards the center point of knowing myself and feeling really comfortable, the less fear is there. And the fear is what creates the barrier. And I feel like it's just naturally falling away. So it's like, I think it's more about being more of myself and showing more of myself, where I've like always had this person. I've always been this person that's just buried underneath all the stuff. And so, yeah, it feels good too. And it gets to a point where it's like, it's impossible not to be authentic. Like the more you pull this off, it's like, oh, I can't be someone else. I can't put on this persona. And I think like, it's interesting, kind of like circling back to some of the things we talked about like early on in this conversation. I remember one of the early influencers was like, oh, you need to have a persona. Like you need to like be this kind of person in order to be famous and to get recognized. And I was like, I can't do that. And so I think that there was always this struggle of like, who should I be for this external, validation or whatever. And like, there was always like this trying to fit myself into something. And like, the more we learn, the more we heal, the more we connect with ourselves, like that becomes impossible. Like it becomes less and less. And so it's like, well, you just get me how I am, no matter how I am right now. Like, that's it. Like, sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's like, whatever. And so feels good. Thank you for that. Like, it feels good to be seen that way. Cause I think like that's been a big benefit for myself, is like feeling comfortable taking up space, being 100% of myself, instead of trying to be this like perfect version of myself all the time, and like reserved and like, hi, nice to meet you, and like polite and all the things. It's like, no, I get to be all of me all the time. So yeah.
And that's where I think, circling back to, you don't have to try, you just have to be, and that is enough. One of the most profound things that I've learned in being married to a hypnotist is when you talk about fears, fear of success, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of, you name the fear. What I've learned in working with Chris and doing so much hypnosis training is that all fears boil down to one fear. There's only one actual fear. All of those are just a projection of this one thing. And you said it. It's the fear of being unlovable. So I think that when you start to love yourself, you no longer give a shit about what other people think, because you have the love that you're trying to find outside of yourself. And that is the ultimate freedom, and why I've stepped out from behind the chair to teach on self-love, because that's the most free. Like, okay, cool, I can teach you to have 6 and 7 figures in your bank, but if you don't love yourself, and if you're not on your own team, then what's the point? So I love that this conversation has stemmed around success, shifting into making sure that our self-love and our self-care is equally on point with all the action that we're putting out into the world. We're serving others because we want to help, not because we want to boost ourselves. I think that you really embody the most beautiful qualities of being a true leader and a true teacher. And that's exactly why I wanted to bring you on the show, because of your wisdom and your willingness to have the courage to be vulnerable and to share, and to say, you know what, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm going through this tidal wave process of figuring it out, and I'm willing to share what I've learned along the way. So I'm curious, before we wrap up, what are some of the books that have transformed your life?
Oof. Okay. I have an extensive library. Let me think. Um, well, I'm kind of deep in Becoming Supernatural right now from Joe Dispenza. So I'm actually going to one of his retreats in July, which I'm excited about. His Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself was probably one of like the most in-depth books that I read about quantum manifesting, meditation, things like that. So that's one I would find really transformational. I always say her name wrong, but there is a book. It's called Welcoming the Unwelcome, and something around fear. I'm going to look it up really quickly because I want to get the name right. But it's from Padma Chaudharan.
And
And
the children.
Children. That's what I'm saying. I'm very visual, so I can see the name. I don't know exactly how to say it. But she talks about a lot about principles. One of the ones that it's so simple. She talks about a lot about processing fear. But one of them is holding your seat, and it's just like being at peace and being still, and that alone of like, it kind of puts us back in the observation place, has been transformational. Gosh, I feel like I've read so many books in the last couple years. Let me think if there's any other ones that just stand out immediately. Oh, yes. Divine Love by Danielle. I'm gonna get all these names wrong. It's Keeping Your Heart Open While the World is Breaking Apart Around You. That's the name of the book. But I'm gonna get the names because I think like these were really impactful books. I've listened to that one probably like 4 times over and over again, just because it talks in such deep terms about love and different forms of love and how like fear limits that. It's a really, really beautiful book. Let's see. It is called How to Be, oh, that's her, sorry. How to Be Loving as Your Heart is Breaking Open and the World is Waking Up. And it's Danielle Laporte. That's a really,
I thought it was Danielle Laporte. When she said Danielle, I'm like, Laporte?
Yeah.
I'm like, it's funny because I'm like, I know these books. I've heard them so much, but then like, I'm like, do I know the author's name? So.
Yeah, I love work from Danielle Laporte. And in fact, when I went and had this massage by a woo-woo therapist years and years ago, she put her hand on my womb and she said, Britt, you're here to birth courage. So when you mentioned the word courage earlier, I'm like, look at us light workers banding together, like doing this work, you know, in the company of each other instead of feeling like we have to do this alone. And I think that's, as spiritual teachers and healers over the last 15 years we've been doing this work, what we have seen is a massive shift and a profound transformation in the rapid awakening of consciousness. And it's just so incredible to see enlightened souls like you waking up to their power, to their truth, and most importantly, to love. That's really the whole point of all of this, is when we can love ourselves, we can freely give it to others. There's no such thing as unconditional love, like, or rather conditional love, because there's only one type of love. If it has conditions, it's not love. And so I think when we can break the barriers that we block the love that we try to give ourselves or seek from someone else, I think that puts us in this really beautiful position to be able to show others how it can be done. Like, we don't have to be afraid of looking at our shadows. We don't have to be afraid of feeling like we don't know what we're doing or what the next step is. I think women like you doing this work really creates an invitation for others to look inward instead of trying to find more external stuff. Reading the books is great, but like you mentioned, all of it is just a remembering. A belief is in the mind and a knowing is in the heart. And I think when we follow our heart, like you said at the beginning, and we question the beliefs that come up that don't support us, that's when we can get in this curious state that unlocks doors that you didn't even know were there.
Oof.
I don't know.
Like
The
snaps
last-
to that.
I mean, that was a
Snaps
good
to that.
one.
Yeah.
Where's the mic? We always love to ask, what does living an elevated life mean to you?
Oh, that has changed a lot over the last year. I think there was initially, to me, like you would ask me this 5 years ago, and it probably would have had to do with money and home and work and all the things. And I think right now, like an elevated life to me is like it's peaceful. Like it is daily practices, it's peaceful, like it's finding, and this may sound whatever, like cheesy cliche, but like the level of like finding gratitude in every moment, I think elevates your life where like everything becomes beautiful, like everything becomes peaceful. And like, because I've gone through these ups and downs of like going through like victim or this or that, where I'm like, I'm living in a place I don't want to live. And then I like, I am really grateful to have a roof over my head. Or I'm really like, I like it's shifting and finding that and like where that elevates. And like for me, it's like the people I see that calls in my life, like, and seeking to see abundance in everything, even in challenges, like everything can become peaceful, can become something to be grateful for. Like, I think what that elevates in your life and like ultimately what that calls in to me is my version of an elevated life now. That's where I'm at with it. And I'm sure that will change again.
Well, we'll have to tune in to see what the updated elevated life vision is for you in 6 months from now.
Yeah.
You know, you've said the word about 14 times in this call, and it's shift. It is actually the last course that I was guided to create. And in fact, when we were driving up to Colorado on my last goddess retreat, I was like frantically just like channeling all the steps on what it looks like to shift in our life. Because so many of us are constantly going through this new evolution and awakening and initiation. And the truth is, you can do it 10 years ago and you're still not free of doing it today. So no matter how enlightened or empowered or confident or worthy you feel, you're always going to be moving through that next chapter and that next transformation. And I love that you've said the word shift 17 times, because that was happening. The universe kept reflecting back to me, shift, shift. I was seeing it everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God, I'll freaking create it. I'm sorry I waited so long, because I wrote the outline like 5 years. Actually, I wrote it in 2020 because the world was shifting and I wanted to create the tools on how to navigate change with ease, because we're constantly going through this up level and releasing the past. And I find that a lot of us, when we're in the chrysalis of change, is where we start to self-sabotage. So I created a program to help you navigate through that. I'm not quite evolved into that next version of myself, but I know if sure shit, I'm not going back to where I came from. So thank you for confirming that we are at this place in consciousness and in the collective, that we are at a shift. We're all collectively shifting individually in our own process of elevation on wherever you're at in your journey, but also together. And so when we bring on powerful light workers like you who are in the shift, it just, I think, acts as an anchor to show it is possible, it is happening. And when you do the work, it's worth it. I didn't say it's easy, but it is worth it. Wouldn't you agree?
Not easy. Yeah.
No.
I'm like, definitely not easy, but it is worth it. Yes, 100%. Like, and I think it's not only worth it, like it becomes something that's impossible to ignore. Like what it does to us, to like when you're called to do this work and you ignore the call, like it gets louder and louder and louder until
And
you
then it
don't
breaks
have.
your hand.
Yeah, exactly. It does something. It does. Yeah, it's like you ultimately don't have the choice. You know, it's one or the other. But yeah, I mean, and I think easy is relative. Like what is hard, you know, it's like it's hard to me staying in a life that I was in would have been a million times harder than going through the process I went through. It's just kind of like the saying says, it's like choosing your hard, you know, picking which direction you want to go. So It's not easy, but it's definitely worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, so true. It reminds me of a time I was sitting with a girlfriend who was in a narcissist relationship, and she had an autistic mute 6-year-old at the time. And I mean, he's older now. Nothing else has changed. He's just gotten older. But she was like, I'm just going to wait until he graduates and then I'll leave him. I was like, so you're going to stay miserable for the next 12 years of your life and be okay with that? And she said, well, damn it, Brittany, now I can't unthink that. Now I can't. Now I envisioned like 12 more years of this, and there's no way I'm going to do that. And I always encourage people to not wait till they hit rock bottom to make a change. So I hope listening to this conversation, you've been inspired to listen to those subtle nudges that your intuition has been guiding you towards, so it doesn't break your hand or create inflammation in the body, because your body will do it for you if you ignore the spirit for too long. So I am curious to hear everyone's takeaway. Be sure to share this, tag this on Instagram. Let us know your ahas. And Cassandra, can you tell people where to find you so that they can connect and see all the magic that you're making in the world?
Yeah. So on Instagram, it's Cassandra Platinum. Really easy. I'm kind of there on all platforms. My website's cassandraplatinum.com. And then I share some information on religious deconstruction on TikTok. And that is, I think, CXC coaching. So yes.
I love that. I just got this vision. She's changing her name from Cassandra Platinum to something else. So
I know I've thought about it, and I'm like, I don't know. Cause I've had it for so long. Yeah.
I know. Well, you're not the same version of yourself anymore.
I am not.
I cannot wait to see what creative inspiration comes through, but mark it here today on the Elevate podcast. She needed a podcast 3 years ago, so we created the space for her to come share her wisdom. And we are just so grateful for this time to connect and to shine a light on the wisdom of your journey. It's been beautiful to witness, and I know that our elevators are going to feel so empowered after hearing that it's possible to change and that you hold the power to decide the life you want to live. Thank you so much for being here, babe. And I can't wait to bring you back on to hear everything that updates and
the
elevates.
Next updates. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Absolutely. Until next time. Peace.